And we are now live. Welcome to another episode of Live with Marcel and Kilani. And today we have a special guest from Hong Kong.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back for another episode. We're really excited to invite our guest, Jason. He has a really cool story, and he is a Gen Z entrepreneur from Hong Kong, as Marcel mentioned, who was recently named as one of the top 10 tertiary students in 2022 with his effort in technology innovation and entrepreneurship. So he runs a company called Qualify, which is an edtech startup providing pioneer AI learning solutions for students. It aims to optimize learning effectiveness and make learning enjoyable through AI personalization systems and gamification. I've spoken to Jason extensively about his company, and it has a very fascinating story. So we are really excited to share his personal story and his professional story as well, as his company takes a really unique approach. They only hire young talent, making Jason not only a Gen Z leader himself, but also an expert in leading them. So welcome, Jason. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Hilani. Thank you for inviting. So excited to share today.
Awesome. We're super excited to have you. So just to kick us off, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep, sure. So maybe I can introduce a bit about the startup I'm working at. So it's actually an edtech startup, and we're currently utilizing different AI tools to redefine how people study. Because in Asia countries, a lot of students, they are under a very pressurized education system, and they need to cram a lot of exercise books, etc., to get a few scores higher. So what we're trying to do here is to automate and digitalize everything, and making the whole process more convenient, more effective, and also more fun for students. So that's something we're trying to work out to do. And yep, so I've been leading this startup since around 1 to 2 years ago. And I'm really someone who is very entrepreneurial. I like to explore different innovative ideas. And yep, so I'm really excited to share some of my experiences, as you have mentioned, in leading Gen Zs, as well as how we can actually motivate them to work together in the workplace. I think this is something very interesting to discuss because we're aware that Gen Zs would, moving forward, they will become the majority of the workforce, and it's important that we know the optimal ways that we can actually work together effectively and motivate them in the workplace.
For sure. And I think this is such a relevant topic right now. As you mentioned, Gen Zs are coming into the workforce, and then over the next, 10, 15 years, maybe even less than that, it's pretty much going to be all Gen Zs. And Gen Zs are eventually going to be in the leadership positions, running companies, managing change. So it's time to really put the focus on the young talent right now and build them up to where they need to be. Yeah. So being a young leader and leading young people yourself, what do you find Gen Zs want in a leader and a company culture?
Okay, so I think Gen Zs, there's a lot of stereotypes, and I think some of them are actually true. So a few facts about Gen Zs that I think, like after some observation, and me myself being a Gen Z, I do think it holds true. So firstly, Gen Zs, they grew up in a very resourceful environment, and they actually they have a very supportive environment. People are very encouraging, and that's actually altered a lot of how they look at things and how they work. So in a workplace scenario, they will really need a lot of positive encouragements and a lot of supportive teammates together in order to motivate them. So instead of just delegating a lot of tasks to them and asking them to finish them and pressurizing them, what they want is to have a very vibrant workplace, a very good work culture where people are very supportive. And these are something that Gen Zs look at a lot, instead of like merely like salary or benefit that maybe motivates the previous generations more in terms of in the workplace. So I think this is something that we will need to be very aware of, because a lot of companies, especially the most traditional ones, they are not as dynamic in terms of shaping and changing the work culture, and more like adopting a very traditional way of motivating their employees. But then work culture is actually something very important, that not only for startups or SMEs, but even I think for larger corporates, they should gradually adopt different strategies in exciting their employees and the workforce. So this is something the Gen Zs particularly like. And also another point is that I think that Gen Zs emphasize a lot of the personal differences. So we see each other as unique. We have our own strengths and weaknesses. We have our own edge, and it would be great if the company actually embraces our own personal differences and celebrates it by allowing us to work at something that we're good at with our own style. So instead of trying to standardize everything, right? A lot of companies, definitely for the operational effectiveness, it's easier to um, make it the same for everyone. Everyone follows the same workflow, the same process, having the same standards. I don't doubt that this might be a good idea, but then at the same time, it's important that we understand that different Gen Z employees, they might have their own preferences in these, and it's important that we allow them to have slight variations and flexibility to work at their own style. So this is also something very crucial in terms of motivating Gen Zs and allowing an environment where they actually enjoy the work and they would like to stay here. So for the retention of Gen Z's employees, I think these are also something that we need to think about.
Oh, I love how you're saying that, Jason. Something that's really interesting is Kilani and I are in the process of doing research for a book, and so we asked this question a lot to business leaders from my generation, right? And we asked them, like, what are you doing to prepare for kind of the Gen Z integration? And the answer that we get from most of the people of my generation is like, we are fully prepared. Like we like our Gen Zs are so happy. They're so they're integrating so nicely. We have a great onboarding system. There's nothing there's nothing really more that we can do to accommodate, right, that difference. And yet when we have conversations with the actual Gen Zs that work in these companies, the experience is very different, right? And so we're sensing a tremendous separation and understanding of kind of like what number two, what constitutes a happy employee, but also like really understanding maybe on both parties of what each kind of side really needs, right, to be able to integrate and work together. What are you noticing in that front?
Right. So I think we're now all under times of changes. There's a lot of volatility, and also, things. The market is changing every day. So in that sense, especially for the Gen Zs who grew up in this environment, um, we tend to not be as prepared and having a very fixed mindset. I know very clearly on how I want to go forward for my career path, and also what I actually wanted. A lot of people, it's not that they are lazy or they don't think about it, but they just don't know what they actually want to achieve yet. So they're very up to explore. They are one who like to try out different things, and I think that also reflects in their needs in the workplace, because a lot of times, instead of going forward for a very very rigid job, they'll actually enjoy something that provides a lot of flexibility to them in terms of able to try out different things, and
Mm-hmm.
being able to explore different interests of them. So some of them,
Mm-hmm.
they went to do multiple freelances jobs as leisure. Some of them might prefer, even like me maybe, running their own company to get a taste of how it is
Mm-hmm.
working at different things, different industries. So yeah, I guess this is definitely a trend we can see in Gen Z, that maybe stability, or a very clear mindset on what they wanted to achieve is not really as similar as before, and they're more adventurous in terms of trying different
Mm-hmm.
things. Yeah.
It almost sounds to me like when I speak to senior leaders, right, in organizations, one of the greatest, I guess, emotions that dictates decision making for the vision of an organization is fear, right? And that fear, a lot of fear driven decisions come from a need for control, right? Where
Mhm.
you know generally we senior leaders see themselves as kind of like the captains of a ship, so to speak, and they need to steer that ship, and so there needs to be a degree of control. And one of the fears that I sense is a lack of control, right? Is that, yeah, but if we're not in control, right, then everything is going to go haywire, right? Things are going to, things are going to go crazy, things are going to go nuts, things are going to break down because we're not in control of how the system is working. And I think what you're saying is that, the Gen Zs look at it more from, they don't want control. They don't, number one, they don't want to be controlled. They want freedom, right? And so one of the major challenges then for an organization is, if you have an organization that is built on a need of control, how do you shift the culture? Like you mentioned, right, in a few years' time, the majority of employees in that company are going to be Gen Zs. How do you shift the culture from being control oriented to being freedom oriented? And potentially that could be, a very big conversation, right, that should be happening in boardrooms today. And especially if you're dealing with an organization of, a few 100,000 employees of multiple generations, are you having conversations around, what are we going to do in the next 5 years in terms of creating shifting a culture, because there's an existing culture of people who are very comfortable living in this need for control type environment, right? Because that's what they've grown up in. And then integrating that with this kind of need for freedom culture that's ever growing in their company, and what kind of preemptive strategies can be put in place to kind of like to allow both to happen at the same time, that there is some degree of control over systems and all of that kind of stuff, while at the same time also having that degree of freedom, right? That is satisfying, this new generation. So that's actually really interesting. I thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very true. I do resonate, especially at the part that they actually don't enjoy control. So it's a dilemma right here, where companies, as the company leaders, they definitely want to make sure that they have a full control on how the employees are behaving and how they're performing. While Gen Zs, they're more self-oriented. They focus on their own work experience here instead of thinking from the company's perspective. But I do think that there's actually the sweet spot here that we can strive a balance, because it's not only like very clear cut whether we're trying to fully control them or not, but it's about whether the company leaders are open-minded enough to actually allow them to have a leeway here in something that's reasonable for them to explore themselves, and respecting their needs. I think this is something that a lot of companies can actually do without making a very huge revamp, but then just that doing this small step in terms of listening more to the Gen Z employees on, oh, actually, what do you want to try, or like what are your needs in this company, so that they can maybe slightly tailor-made something that suits the employee the most. And this is something that I believe a lot of Gen Z employees, they hope to have in the workplace. So I actually talked to some of my fellow colleagues from Qualify, and they also mentioned, a few of them also mentioned this point, like the flexibility here is something that makes them wanted to stay, and something that they actually liked a lot so far, because it's definitely still not found in a lot of traditional companies for now. I do believe that, as you've mentioned, the companies are now definitely under discussions on how they can do the transition. And yeah, so I do think that change is needed for sure. It's actually applicable for everything, not only for this sort of work culture. We need to change with the times in order to match with the needs. And as the Gen Zs would be the next major workforce, right? It's important that we shift to a mode that actually motivates them the most, and that works the best with them. So maybe previously, very like a top-down approach of strict control is working out very well for the employees, but then for the current culture, for the current new workforce, young workforce, probably something in between. balancing between the freedom, the flexibility, then while having some sort of control. I guess the control would be in form of some very clear guidelines, or even some, as I've mentioned, they like encouragements a lot. So maybe some positive reinforcement, like some reward schemes. These would be something that works even better than like strictly asking the employees to follow certain sets of processes without being able to have their own thoughts. So I guess it's about balancing between these, but it's already very good if companies have the awareness to actually see how they can redesign or devise something that works the best with their current mix of workforce.
Yeah, and it's as you're saying that, to me, a second kind of major change that's going to need to happen is then going from kind of the directive type of leadership, right? Of kind of like, this is the direction that we're going in, more into a listening type of leadership, right? Where we have leaders who are able to listen to the needs of their people, and maybe even listen to suggestions and input across the organization that helps dictate the direction of the company. And so that this new generation of people feel heard, feel listened to, rather than and thus also feel like their input matters, right? And so next to having an organization that is run on control and fear, right? The fear of not being in control, and there also needs to be kind of an organizational shift, going from kind of giving directives of like, hey, listen, everybody, this is our vision for the future, this is where we're going, and that's kind of that. I think this is going to be one of the major challenges for organizations in the future, is because if you look at leadership training, even today, right, a lot of education, leadership education, is built around that the vision has to be provided by the leader. And I think that the Gen Z population, or the Gen Z generation, is going to turn that upside down. I think that old school way of thinking is going to fall on its butt, and it's going to prove a lot of these old kind of leadership theories and philosophies that we used to kind of study and apply and research and do all of these kind of things. I think a lot, just because of that, it's going to turn a lot of that upside down, and there's going to be another big disruption in the leadership space. Because if you come to think about it, like leadership training hasn't changed since like before the internet. Like a lot of the stuff that we're still reading about leadership is from books from before 1990, right? And so there's a lot that we're going to have to do, from a kind of like a leadership generation, right? To be willing to challenge those things that we believed were always true and always worked, and be able to challenge the most fundamental of our belief systems, in order for us to kind of create that that integration. And that's going to come from listening. It's not going to come from talking, right? So that would, to me, that's kind of like a second big takeaway, right? Is that yes, there, going from control to freedom, and then going from telling to listening. I think that's a very big a big thing. Thank you for sharing that. It's awesome.
Right. Yeah. Communication is definitely like two-way. So listening to their needs and understanding like what works best for them is definitely important. And yeah, I do like agree with the point you just mentioned about how they actually want to see their own effort in the company, and they want to know how they're actually contributing to gain that sense of achievement, a sense of belonging to the company, and also sharing their vision together. So I guess before, it's more on a top-down approach where it's fully about the company leaders. They're like passing down on the culture and what should be done. But then now I think Gen Zs, they also they enjoy a lot if they have the opportunity to also take ownership in something and being able to voice out their own innovative ideas or suggestions to the company, and not only able to share, but actually they see that the firm is willing to partially maybe to follow through their suggestions if it works, or at least to listen to them. So this is something that a lot of companies they missed out, I believe. If the companies they can spend more time to provide something hands-on for the, even if they're very young talents or they don't have much experience, but then probably they still have their own specific ideas and something that the company have not thought about. So it's important that they appreciate the voices of all employees, no matter they're seniors or even for juniors. And particularly for Gen Zs, they care a lot about their contribution and their whether they can take part in these discussions and decision making for sure. So yeah, I do think again balance is important. It's not about Gen Zs can take over everything and decide everything, but then it's the gesture whether they can at least have the platform and the channel to voice out something. And I believe it also boils down to the hierarchy of the company, right? It would be better, for example, in Qualify here, especially where a special startup based with young talents ourselves, we do have a very flat hierarchy. It doesn't mean losing control to them and not be able to effectively manage them, but it's about we are not really segregating people in terms of their experiences or in terms of their age, and we listen to everyone. As long as they make valid points and something reasonable, we do try to take their advice. So this sort of mode of work is also highly enjoyed by the people in Qualify here. And I do think it works pretty well with Gen Zs because that's fulfilling their sense of achievement in working in this company. Yep. And we do like let them know very regularly on how their work, no matter if it's just something administrative or something small, but how it actually really contributed to the bigger picture as in the whole company, and how we're growing with same vision together. So I do believe it's important for motivating Gen Zs in terms of letting them know how they have been doing and how significant the work has been, and also being able to bond them together and like more like a family instead of just merely an employer-employee relationship. So we're hoping to gather them together, motivate them, and communicating to them that we're all striving towards the same value, same mission, same goal. So this is I do believe it's very important in motivating Gen Zs as well.
Yeah, you both have made a number of great points about what makes Gen Zs different and also how to potentially adjust to their preferences at work. And you touched on this a little bit with the flatter hierarchical structure, but I'm really curious, what kind of changes are you making at your company, or what have you done differently to adjust for these different needs of Gen Zs?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do believe the whole structure design or the whole work culture is actually designed with the context in mind that we have a lot of young talents. They might be not as experienced, but then they are highly creative. They also are like at the very front end at the whole trend nowadays. For example, like the generative AI, etc. The Gen Z, the young talents, will be someone who knows the most about these, right? They're following the trends. So with this unique unique talents here at the talent pool here and also the culture here, what we're trying to do is to design different processes that highly engages them in co-creating together, right? So I do believe one of the interesting point is instead of treating people as employees, so even as the founder of this company, I do try to like develop some sort of personal relationships with them. And I do think like in a healthy way for sure, but then I do think it's very important because as mentioned, Gen Zs, they don't merely look for a stable job. They don't only look at the salary and benefits, but they also want to be having a very enjoyable work environment where they can be somewhat like I'll use the term a partner, right? Not entirely a friend, but then a partner where they can like strive together towards what they're working at, and they will feel very motivated. So I do think I got some inspiration from one of my past experience working at Starbucks, because if you know, Starbucks is well known for having very good employer branding. They're calling their colleagues, partners together, but not just the name, but also the relationship there. It's very, very special. They have a strong bonding. And I do believe this is definitely something Gen Zs enjoy a lot. And if companies can really take some initiative to flatten the hierarchy a bit, and also again letting them to have a bit of more ownership in different things that doesn't impact the whole process a lot, it will be great because they can see themselves as not just a very newcomer in a company not being able to do anything, but actually they are also a very important asset valued by the company, and that their relationship with the colleagues and even the senior management could be less distant. And they can be very close with them, and they can be fully engaged in this company in terms of the culture. So I do think that's something that's probably quite new, quite unique, and we're trying to be at the forefront at this part where we do see the Gen Z employees is very effective under this sort of relationship approach.
That's really cool. And I want to say a huge kudos too for taking a leap and trying that, knowing, both in your own experience as a Gen Z and having experience leading them to, having the courage to actually do things differently. And as a result, seeing the benefits and seeing how much better they're reacting to it, your company's reacting to it. And why is it that Gen Zs have such different preferences from the previous generations?
Well, again, I think it's actually how they grew up, right? The environment is very different. So, for example, they're more tech savvy because they're digital natives, and the resources. It's a whole new market, right? And things are changing very rapidly nowadays in terms of the whole market. What's happening? New technologies. They're just rapidly coming in, and this has shaped how the Gen Z employees, their expectations, and also what they're looking for, right? So previously, probably when there's less resources in society, the employees, they just want something stable. But then for now, because the Gen Zs themselves, they probably have more resources and more access to different things. For example, the internet is really changing how things are since they're born. So what they're looking for might be to the next level. They will be hoping, having higher expectations in different aspects in the workplace, and that's something that we need to be aware of because in terms of different companies, especially in the same industry, in order to attract the talents, it's about how not only how competitive the salary package is, but also how you build your employer branding, how you communicate the special work culture here to engage them, to attract them. So in terms of attracting talents, I do believe this would actually help a lot also as well. So it's not only about making an environment very enjoyable or effective for the Gen Zs, but it also helps indirectly with the talent acquisition and also retention.
Great. And I'm going to ask the big question here when it comes to the Gen Z discussion. And that is it worth a leader's time and energy to actually make these adjustments for the new generation?
Yeah, I definitely I do think so because uh, definitely I do think different companies, they have different priorities. Maybe they're in different scales. They have different flexibility level in order to how much of changes they can make. But then eventually, if you think about it, the future is the Gen Z workforce, and maybe like 2 decades later on, Gen Z is already outdated, right? We have the next generation would have new needs, and it's about the mindset of being very fluid, very, very adaptive in order to suit with the workplace here. So in terms of the talents, in terms of the workforce, if that's how the young talents works the best, right? If that's what they need, then theoretically every company, they should eventually be able to shift to this new normal in the workplace where it's able to engage with the Gen Z or employees and help them to work to their optimal performance. So it's actually also benefiting the companies themselves in the end. It's not only about having extra cost and extra time effort in changing the culture or shaping the how employer branding is, but it's also eventually motivating their majority of the workforce in the future and helping them as a company to perform better with utilizing the creativity and also the novelty of what values the Gen Z employees can bring to the table. So yeah, I do think that it works experimenting. I still do think like for Gen Zs, They're still changing a lot, and it still works a lot of trial and error. It takes time, so it's not about whether we're doing it or not, but it's about having the open-mindedness to experiment with the employees and communicating, as we've just discussed earlier, listening to them and trying to formulate different strategies. So I do believe it's this ongoing process where we can eventually shift to a mode of work where employees, especially the younger talented Gen Zs nowadays, they found very engaging. They find the motivation working here, and eventually that's how companies can perform better, right?
Definitely, yeah. And you've mentioned a number of great changes that companies can make and that Gen Zs can make as well. And I really like that you mentioned the coming generations beyond us as well. And I think that that's why this is such an important step for us to make in organizations, is that it's not just about adjusting to the Gen Zs, right? It's about changing our leadership strategy so that we can continue to adapt and adjust to everyone that comes beyond us, generations to come. Yeah. And so if there's one thing that leaders and Gen Zs alike can take away from this live stream and put into practice this week to create a bit more of a unification between the generations, what would you say that one thing would be?
Yeah, I would say like sometimes maybe, especially for the more well-established companies, they have a very rigid process in terms of everything, including how the new employees are being onboarded, how their whole career pathway is moving up the company's hierarchy. But then the first step would actually be communicating with them. So a lot of companies maybe for different reasons they avoid actually talking directly to the Gen Zs, or maybe they just guess about the Gen Z's needs. So a lot of companies maybe they think there's a lot of stereotypes going on with Gen Zs and on what's working best with them, and they try to formulate the strategies by guessing or by hearing from others. But eventually, as mentioned, that Gen Zs value their own personal differences and their uniqueness a lot, and I do believe there's never a one size fits all solution to all companies, right? So the best first step will always be starting to engage with their own Gen Z young talents and talking to them. There could be different ways to that, like depending on how much time they can afford, or how much effort they would like to in doing this. But it's about actually trying this. It's not as hard. So Gen Zs are actually pretty open to communication, in my opinion. They're very like vocal in expressing their own views and their thoughts and what they need. So if we are like being willing to talk to them and trying to listen, or what are the needs, or what do they think about the company now, or what are their thoughts on the whole process, and if there's any suggestions from them. So basically these sort of conversations will already help a lot in terms of gaining some visibility on what works best for their own Gen Z employees, and also what's their next step, right? Because I do believe, again, every company, depending on its scale, its size, and maybe the culture, the industry, they might have different moves that would work best for their young talents. But I do think that the one size fit all solution is to talk to them. So this is a lot of companies that they might be avoiding this, or they might not have actively done this. But if they are able to take the first step and try it out, I do think they can get some valuable insights on how they should move forward and transform their work culture, or maybe the mode of management, so that they can better cater to the needs of Gen Z employees. Yeah.
For sure. I love that the prime answer there is just communicate. When in doubt, go straight to the source, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually very important.
Yes, for sure. And like you said, Gen Zs are open to the communication. And we always joke on all of our past live streams, the end takeaway always comes down to either trust or communication, which go hand in hand with each other. And I love that this is a prime example of just communicate. Because at the end of the day, like you said, every Gen Z is a different thing that they need. Every leader is a different thing they need. Every organization does. And so by communicating, that's the quickest way to figure this out.
Yeah. I think like it's also about the frequency as well, because as we just discussed earlier, right? Gen Zs, they are more like volatile. They don't tend to have a very clear mindset yet, maybe especially at this stage when they're still young talents in the workforce. So it's also crucial that we keep on engaging them from time to time to see if they have any changes in their thoughts, and maybe if there are any changes in their own motivation working in the company, right? So we also have some experiences in that. For example, some employees midway they might be losing interest in what they started off working at, but then they have some new goals or new interests that they will actually try something new. So if we don't actively talk to them and having the awareness that we need to keep on understanding their thoughts and their motivation, then we will probably be unable to cater to these sort of needs. So what we did is we try to have some regular conversations with the employees, not only about work stuff, but then also about the personal goals, and trying to, as mentioned, to build some sort of personal level relationship with them, which highly motivates them. And by these conversations regularly, we can understand more about the employees themselves, as well as how we can maybe cater or change how we manage them or the tasks we provide to them in order to have them work at an optimal performance. So it's not only something one-off that we can do and then never change again, but it's an ongoing process moving forward that I believe in general for companies, they should embrace the culture of being very vocal and discussing different things, and also engaging their employees more in terms of both co-creating ideas for the company, and also looking at what their needs is for the young talent. So it's about the ongoing and frequent communication. That it sounds very like just a buzzword communication, but then eventually there's a lot we can do, and it's about whether companies are willing to execute these sort of strategies in the forefront. Yeah.
Awesome. And my last question for today is, where can people connect with you and your company?
Yeah. So I'm very happy to be sharing here today, and I do enjoy if you have any questions or anything you would like to engage with me. You can just feel free to approach me on LinkedIn, and you can definitely also look at our company website for more information if you would like to learn more about what Qualify is doing, our impact we're trying to make in the education industry, especially in Asian countries where education is very rigid and very traditional. So yeah, feel free to connect with me, and happy to have a chat.
Perfect. And I've just put all those links in the comments for all of our viewers. I have Qualify's website and Qualify's LinkedIn page there as well. And right after this, I will go in and get Jason's LinkedIn link as well and put that in the comments to make it easy for you to connect with him. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story. This was really insightful. And like I've said a number of times too, I think it's really cool the position that you're in, being both a Gen Z leader yourself and leading Gen Zs. Because like Marcel mentioned in the beginning, we have conversations with leaders and we have conversations with people who are in the Gen Z generation. And there's often a dissonance between what they think about each other versus what's actually going on. And having you kind of on the inside in both of those roles simultaneously is a really cool perspective to hear.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again for both of you for inviting me to share my own 2 cents here. Definitely, I'm still like having a lot of trial and errors. I'm still testing what works best. But then, yeah,
Sure.
I do believe it's always about the having an open mindedness that Gen Zs and maybe the senior workforce, they don't actually have so much difference, but it's only about a change in their needs, and slight changes in the work culture will already bridge them together and help them to achieve a very optimal work effectiveness and being able to manage them in a very good way. So yeah, just don't be afraid to address these issues. It's not something that we should be scared of, but then it's something that we should happily embrace the whole new mode of work and how we can and better motivate the Gen Z employees. And eventually, I don't think this is actually a very tough issue. It's something that all the companies can easily address if they're being open-minded enough to make these changes and small steps. Yeah, so thank you. Happy to share.
Of course. And I see we have a comment here from Ashok. Very insightful conversation on the new generation of Gen Zs and the new work culture. Thank you, Ashok, for your comment, and thank you for watching as well. Marcel, do you have any last closing words?
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, thank you so much for for sharing this. This is really insightful also for me, because I work a lot with of course with senior leaders, and so hearing kind of both sides of the story at the same time, like Kilani was saying. I think it's really important. And what I'm understanding from this is that one of the key roadblocks, right, for leaders and Gen Zs to be able to integrate is there a willingness to remove biases, right? And do senior leaders have a bias towards believing that their way of operating that they've been doing for decades is the way of doing it, and that can't change? And are they willing to challenge those biases, and are they willing to challenge the bias, right, of just because Gen Zs operate differently, they're potentially inefficient? We often hear kind of very, very stereotypical comments about Gen Zs about they're always on their phones, and they're they don't have resilience, and they can't push, they don't have the ability to focus and stay connected long enough. But really, all of these judgments are just based on our own biases, right? It's all based on kind of our own framework, and it shows leaders that are not capable of breaking through their own bias and saying, hey, you know what, maybe this is an opportunity for us to be able to challenge that belief system, and to say, let's look at potentially at a way of doing it differently. And as Kilani said, of course, because it's not just the Gen Z generation that's coming. There are multiple generations coming afterwards. And this is an ongoing trend that's only going to become more so. And so for people like us who still want to be around in 20 years time, in the industry, we're going to have to be able to challenge a lot of those beliefs that we live in, and that have proven quite successful until recently, and now as we're moving forward could potentially be a dysfunction. And so I find that very interesting. We're kind of like at the cusp of a new revolution, so to speak, in terms of how we lead and how we operate, and it's going to be that willingness to be able to challenge those that's going to be able to make our organization sustain in the future. So thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful and very insightful. And hopefully one day we can bring you on again as a guest for a future show. Especially as your company is growing and expanding, and new challenges that I'm sure you're going to deal with in the future as well.
Cool. Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. In that case, thank you to all of our live stream viewers. We appreciate you, whether you're watching live or watching the replay. And as always, let us know in the comment section if you watch live or watch the replay. We always love hearing from you. Give a big thank you to Jason as well, and definitely go check out his company LinkedIn page and connect with him on LinkedIn as well. And as Marcel said, we hope to have you on again one day in the future.
Great stuff. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you to the audience. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Kilani, for doing an amazing job hosting this episode. I love the interactions that I'm hearing between you guys. It's awesome. So thank you so much. And of course, we will see the audience in our next episode. When is our next one, Kilani? Do you know?
Next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
So awesome.
If you're on the other side of the world, that's 7 a.m. Singapore time, which if you follow us on our Level 5 Partners LinkedIn page, I post a time zone converter for all of our world viewers. So if you ever get confused, just head over to that page and you can find your local time.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, thank you, everybody. That was it from us, and we will see you next week around this time. See you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.